People come with a curiosity and an interest in Christianitism, as well as people who have been convinced Christianists for a long time. And I was thinking a workshop like this, maybe at the beginning for new people, might be a good idea. And I guess my basic rap is that I'm from the Catholic worker movement, but there are other expressions of radical Christianity. We have strayed from the original message of Christ, and this is all predicted in Scripture with the centrality of the temptations in the desert. Just before Jesus starts his public life, he goes into the desert for 40 days, mirroring the 40 years the Jews wandered around the desert after fleeing Pharaoh, and he's confronted basically by three temptations, and that is power to control the kingdoms, wealth to create bread, and status to jump off the tower as a PR stunt. And these are the temptations that not only have co-opted Christianity over the last 2,000 years, they co-opt every dissident movement. Whether it's trade unionism, or whether it's the Labour Party, or whether it's feminism, whether it's punk rock, whether it's rap music, all these dissident voices confronting power are tempted by power, wealth and status. I think with radical Christians, you go back to the early years of the church, and what you find is an anarchist orientation towards power and a pacifist orientation towards violence. So I think when we stumbled across Christian anarchism in the 70s, we come out of the protest movement. We knew what we were for, what we were against. We weren't quite sure what we were for. And we were a group of Christians who had a morality, a personal morality that we'd gleaned from church teaching and scripture. And I guess our understanding about politics is then you went out into the secular world and you joined the Labour Party, or you joined the Communist Party, or you joined the Conservative Party to practice your Christian morality. And I think at the stage we became Christian anarchists was we quickly realised that there's actually an implicit politics. It isn't like Christian Marxism where you're marrying two ideologies, but implicit in Christian discipleship is an anarchist orientation towards power. We're called not to lord it over people, but to serve them. That Jesus refuses to become king and usher in his kingdom through the violence of the state. And we've become pacifists because we realise that Jesus was a pacifist. That if he taught us anything on the cross, he taught us how to die rather than how to kill, how to suffer rather than cause suffering. And I think anyone who arrives at a pacifist position, whether it's Buddhist or humanist or Christian, really has to become an anarchist, because you observe that all governments are based on violence. They're all based on cops and prisons and military and the ability to take life. And all governments claim a monopoly over violence. And that's why they find other groups who think they have a justification for violence, like the IRA, and they find pacifists who say no one's got a right to violence. They find both those groups as deeply subversive. And in World War II, Quakers were rounded up. All sorts of people who were just pacifists, basically. The anarchist orientation is, I think, very significant in Christianity, because Christianity has been largely since the 3rd century co-opted, and basically three traditions or three historical responses in Christianity to the question of violence. You have pacifism, which is an absolutist ethic that we believe Christ practiced. In the 3rd century, with the Constantine shift, where the Emperor Constantine legalizes Christianity, then becomes a Christian without giving up his Caesarship, without giving up empire, and then patronizes Christianity. And in a very brief period, it goes from being illegal to be a Christian in the Roman Empire to being illegal not to be one. So no Christians joined the Roman military, so you had to be a Christian to join the Roman military. So Christianity gets co-opted by empire. The American empire has its own version of spirituality, and they both come out of California. There's a fundamentalist Christian version and there's a New Age version. And it's all about, as a friend observed, privatized optimism and social despair. It's, whether you get that through your crystals or your relationship with Jesus and belief in the rapture, there's privatized optimism and social despair. And they're the popular spiritualities of this empire. The way discipleship, we see discipleship practices basically through three things. One is community, and I think you've got to be careful not to define that too narrowly. And then in that, you're not only trying to keep a rhythm of prayer and reflection going, but also rhythms of reconciliation, of sharing resources, of hopefully even eventually capturing the means of production, And then from that reality, going out in the acts of mercy, feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned. And those are the only two things we're doing. If we're only doing community, then they'd probably bring tourist buses around like they did for the Amish and check us out and think we're very cute and anachronistic. And if all we're doing with the acts of mercy, they throw government money at us because we're basically mopping up after capitalism. But the third thing we do is resistance, prophetic, non-violent resistance, where we go and confront the principalities and powers who cause poverty and death and homelessness. And that's what gets us in trouble with the law, and it's taken to court and often to prison. And those three things, I think, give each other integrity. If we're just doing the community thing, it'd be really self-indulgent and self-obsessed, and if we're just doing the acts of mercy, it'd be just like codependent with capitalism, mopping up after their mistakes. If we were just doing the resistance, it'd be this kind of disembodied voice, So I think doing the three badly is better than doing one well. That tension gives an integrity to the mix, The reason we focus our resistance on the military is the military is what keeps the system of global exploitation together. It's really whether, like the first night I spent in prison, I was sharing a cell with a Korea-run robber who told me that people will stop robbing banks when banks stop robbing people. And I thought that's a really prophetic insight that you'd only really hear in jail. And what it points to is there's two sorts of crime in our world. There's wholesale theft and murder and dealing in dangerous substances. And then there's then most people you meet in jail aren't in there for heroically rebelling against capitalism. They're in there for mimicking those with the birthright to thieve and kill and deal, people like Bush and Cheney. But they haven't been born without the birthright, and they've tried their luck in their neighbourhoods, and they've been imprisoned. And or some of them are victims of historic crimes like Australian Aborigines and the theft of their lands and destruction of their culture. And the reason why, say, Salvadoran peasants and Filipino factory workers go to work every day for a pittance while their children starve is not because they think, oh, this is a great way to organise the economy. It's because they know if they form a trade union or a radical church group that they will meet what the military calls escalation dominance. Initially they'll meet the local death squad. If they're too strong for that, they'll meet the Filipino or Colombian regular army. If they're too strong for that, they'll meet the US Marines. They'll meet the B-52 bombardment. So the empire can escalate to the next level of violence, all the way to thermonuclear war, to keep their arrangement together. So it's important, it's a radical insight to see that there's a relationship between exploitation and violence, and also between peace and justice. And as LA burned in the early 90s, the crowds were chanting, no justice, no peace, which is what Pope Paul has said, if you want peace, work for justice.